work harder to work less. Whether it's people who work on, Taylorism, things like that, but also finance, intellectuals of finance, trying to squeeze more out of people's, inability to create a livelihood. But then there's a second set of intellectuals who create desire, aspirations, advertising people. These are also intellectuals who come in and create a new cultural universe. More people entering the private media landscape. This was already clear to us in the news media. I started off as a news reporter for New Delhi television. Then it was called The World This Week. I had really super colleagues. You might know some of them. One of them was mentioned earlier, Rajdeep Sardesai. It was a small office. And then, of course, the great genius and one of the most intelligent Indians who's ever been born, Arnab Goswami. So, we were a very small office, and there was, Chief Minister Arnab, who had already become an expert in terrorism. He had written a book which he used to try to flog to us every day. You already knew that something terrible was going to happen in the media landscape, that a construction of an immense falsity of desire was going to take place, and there was going to be an exercise of concealing from the masses the reality of social labor and private accumulation. This is a degeneracy that was creeping into society, and it was quite clear that this new intellectual class, including this new political class, people like Lal Krishna Advani, who, now, like George W. Bush, is getting rehabilitated, but Lal Krishna Advani was a venomous character, hateful man. These are the intellectuals who orchestrated the idea of scapegoating in society. This is not a new idea for places like India, but the velocity of scapegoating was going to intensify. This was very clear to us. Part 1, conditions. Part 2, facts. There are 1.3 billion people roughly in India. According to a McKinsey study, 700 million of them go hungry every day, or at least don't know where their next meal is coming from. That's about 1 in 2 Indians, roughly. 300 million Indians, very conservative number, wouldn't be able to read that McKinsey report. 240 million Indians wouldn't be able to read that report at night because they don't have electricity. And stunningly, 1 million Indians enter the sewers of the country every year to clear them manually, despite the fact that there is equipment to do this work. 1 million Indians. There are more poor people in India than in the entirety of sub-Saharan Africa. India is one of the poorest places on the planet Earth. There are also millionaires, there are also nuclear bombs, there's also Narendra Modi. Now, 100 years ago, I think last week, Gandhi, here I am, I don't know, what's the name for me now? Let's Orthodox Marxist, or vulgar, whatever. These are all nice names. Vulgar is fine actually. I actually like vulgar. Vulgarity has a certain nice ring to it, you see, because you can be honest then. Gandhi, about 100 years ago, said something quite beautiful in Mayo College in Pune. He said the test of civilization of a country is not the number of millionaires it has, but the absence of starvation among its people. Now, 100 years later, it's clear India has failed this moral test. It's a very elegant, simple test. India has totally failed. Part 2, facts. Part 3, politics. See, I'm going quickly. But the thing is, part 3 is long, so... and I'm making some of it up as I go along. I'm looking down, but some of it I'm making up. So let's see. Politics. By the 1970s, yes, it is made up, so it's okay.
Even the facts section?
Yes, the fact section is all made up. There's a sort of Borgesian thing. You can decide what's true or not.
It's fake news.
It's fake news. Yeah, that's right. 240 million Indians can't read. That's fake news. By the 1970s or maybe the 1980s, Indian freedom struggle, or its reservoirs, had depleted themselves. I mean, there was an exhaustion to Indian freedom struggles. I mean, for me, a good indicator of that is the Planning Commission meeting in, I think, 1985, when Rajiv Gandhi goes in as, the head of the Planning Commission, even though Prime Ministers rarely came in and ran the commission meetings. Manmohan Singh was then the actual chair of the commission. Rajiv Gandhi comes into a 1985 Planning Commission meeting and says, why are you bothering about farmers and support prices and all this crap? Rajiv Gandhi used to talk like that. Why are you bothering with all this crap? He said, you need to think about building American-style freeways. We need to have better airports. We need to have malls. Why aren't you guys thinking about malls? Which is interesting because they were thinking about the opposite of malls. How to protect agricultural farmlands, what's happening to farmers' livelihoods, things like that. Now, whether again they did anything useful with those discussions or not, the point is that was their discussion. This guy comes out and says, that's all boring. Let's think about becoming America. National liberation was really exhausted by then. There was a constituency among the so-called middle class. The word middle class inserted itself in place of the dominant classes. The word middle class can mean anything. What they really meant was the dominant classes in society were interested in transforming the kind of class compact that had been won through the national movement. And so what you see after 1985 is the surrender of the Indian National Congress. Already by the emergency period, Inder Gujral had come before the emergency parliament and said that we need to attract foreign exchange, we need to cut license Raj. This was Inder Gujral, very fine man, very distinguished person, but he was saying this stuff in the emergency parliament in 1976. It didn't happen until 1990-91. Slowly in the 80s they were doing some things, but in 1991 it's a decisive break. You see the surrender of the Congress party, and slowly from 91 to the present, those old socialistic Gandhian sections of the party got marginalized or left. They went to other places, including some sections went to initially the BJP. The Samajwadi dynamic, the old socialist dynamic, also begins to lose steam. And you begin to see, whether it's the Samajwadi party or this Janata party or that Janata party or this Lok Dal, that Lok Dal, Lalu Prasad here, Mulayam Singh there, one way or the other they began to collaborate fundamentally with the regional bourgeoisie. The fact that we used to call the Samajwadi party in UP the party of Rashtriya Sahara is not, an idle comment. The Sahara group basically were the underwriters of Mulayam Singh Yadav's party in Uttar Pradesh. So there was a general surrender, in a sense, of the bulk of the political class, including some of the regional political parties, to this new policy dispensation. This policy dispensation which favored the trajectory of malls and airports rather than support prices and, let's say, some forms of protection for the poor. Now, this was itself very difficult for any political movement that wanted to chart an alternative. Those terms from the 1990s, in 96 for instance, of the Third Front, United Front, Popular Front, if you draw the earlier terms, these were all terms with very limited content. Who is going to join your Third Front? Who is going to join your United Front? Who is going to come to you? These are questions that I'm going to return to in a second. If everybody else has gone in the other direction, how are you going to be able to create a national popular will to move the agenda in a different way? The left was put on the back foot by the mid-1990s. And this comes to that very important vote in 1996 made by my party, the CPIM, in our Central Committee, when the opposition groups came to Jyoti Basu, very venerable leader of our movement, and said, will you become the Prime Minister of the country? And our Central Committee had a very long meeting and decided at the end of it that no, Jyoti Basu cannot become the Prime Minister because he will merely become the Prime Minister of a government with a completely different political direction. It's going to go in a completely different political direction. In fact, that government didn't last very long because there was just not enough political power. And there was no alternative national popular will that Jyoti Basu could have driven forward into a different direction, broken India into a different policy direction. There was simply not the will. In this period, as we see this surrender of every political party, including the Congress, especially the Congress, to this policy direction which increased inequality, which brought a great deal of agrarian suffering, at the same time, you see the emergence, rapid emergence of the fascistic RSS and its political party, the BJP. Rapid ascension, and the ascension came on that one empty category. That's the, in a sense, the genius of the BJP's national political emergence, on that empty category, corruption. You see, corruption is an interesting category because it will produce the Tweedledee Tweedledum politics. Every bourgeois party, when it's out of power, will accuse the one in power of corruption. And then you can just go back and forth and say they are corrupt, and you'll create a consensus where people forget that both are corrupt. And you say they are more corrupt because the scandals are more recent. You see, because that scandal with Adani happened yesterday. And then when you come to power, you'll have your own scandal, and then you'll delegitimize yourself, and then you can come back. This corruption word produces a consensus of one party rule, essentially, with the difference in India that one party has this fascistic brain, the RSS, pushing it in a horrible direction. So what is the left to do? Now, I'm very glad we're meeting here not immediately after our defeat in Tripura. Because if we did, you'd just pile onto me and say, you guys are useless, you should close down. I'm going to come down to the you should close down shop. Between the defeat in Tripura and now, other things have appeared, which have, by the way, always been there. You might not know that in September 2016, 180 million Indian workers went on strike in September 2016. 180 million workers. My friends, what is the population of Canada? Huh? How much? How many? How many again? What was that? How many times do we have to say that to come to 160 million?
6 times.
6 times. Well done. 160 million. How did they go on strike? I'm going to come back to that in a minute. That was in September of 2016. The left hasn't done anything. The left hasn't done. The left doesn't do this. We come back to that. Between the defeat in Tripura and now, we've had two major struggles, which I'd just like to point out. And I'd like you to go and do what every self-respecting person seems to do these days. Go and Google it. Number one is the struggle in Sikar, Rajasthan. I'd like you to go and look and watch the NewsClick reports on the struggle in Sikar, Rajasthan. These are very impressive agrarian workers' struggles. The other thing is, go and Google Kisan Long March, the march in Maharashtra, which was led by the All India Kisan Sabha. This was an amazing march, guys. They marched 160 kilometers and they arrived in Bombay, and the leadership heard that there were class 10 exams the next day, so they kept marching through the night so they wouldn't disturb the students when they had their examinations. These are moral, upright people. And they forced the BJP government, horrible government, to accept their demands. This is also Indian communism. And I'd like to talk a little bit with that in mind. So I have some questions that I'm raising. I think there are 3-4 of them that I hope you find useful. And the broad section now is called anachronisms. What should the left do? The left exists, by the way. I've been a member of the CPIM for now almost 30 years. We have 1 million cadre members. That's 1 million people in our party. We have about 80 million people in our mass movements, including 14 million in the All India Women's Democratic Association, about 12 to 15 million in the All India Kisan Sabha. These are very large organizations. It's impossible just to say, I don't know, what would be the opposite thing? Close them down. I'm going to come to that in a second. Anachronisms. What is the left to do? Number one, become social democrats. Now, Ram Guha and I have had this conversation for years. Look, he says, the party is already social democratic. You basically were social democrats in West Bengal. Why don't you just become social democrats? Just give up the hammer and sickle, give up the whole Lenin-Stalin thing. Recently, he wrote a piece in the Telegraph saying, you should just adopt Bhagat Singh and forget all the foreign leaders. Because the BJP had just knocked down the Lenin statue. And so he said, maybe he is a foreign person. Guys, the BJP, and especially the RSS, is inspired by Hitler and Mussolini. Munji went to Italy and studied fascist tactics from Munji. To my mind, Savarkar is a foreigner. Not to India, but to the planet Earth. So, why do you need Savarkar, paintings in the parliament? The other day I was talking to somebody, she was saying, have you read this book by God Bole? I said, are you joking? Read a book by God Bole? I mean, for what? Like for some intellectual thing or to learn something? She was like, well, it's a very interesting book. Really? This guy killed Gandhi, man. Why would I read a book? Become social democrats, Ram says. And then, you can be the backbone of a new revival. Something to consider is that communism has a very slow, like a turtle, slow journey. It moves steadily. And it works confounded by the dialectic between the present and the future. See, this dialectic between the present and the future is something that I think one should consider. If you, as a political party, a communist party or a socialist party or whatever, some kind of transformative party that believes in a post-capitalist future, if you as this kind of party exceed too much to the present, there's a tendency to reformism. See, one of the interesting features is in our theory, in our understanding of how capitalism works, we don't find it credible that the dominant classes want to share wealth and power with everybody else. We don't find that a credible approach to human reality. We don't think that the dominant classes, infected somehow by liberalism, are going to deliver to the poor and the peasants and workers and so on a greater share of the surplus and say, why don't you also come in and govern with us? I mean, today I visited the picket lines at York. Why doesn't this administration, among whom I used to know some of these people personally, actually just come and negotiate with the students? Why do they demand that the students have to surrender before they negotiate? You see, what I'm saying is that you'd have to have a completely upside down vision of reality if you believe that the ruling class, just nudged a little bit by liberalism or good feeling, is going to give up capital, give up power, give up these things just to look nice and be considered as decent people. They're not decent people. They are advantaged by an indecent, immoral structure. So if you believe in a social democratic politics alone, then what happens is you are going to basically betray the workers and peasants who are part of your movement. Because they are not going to be able to get a better deal unless they struggle and fight and build power. So in a sense, exceeding too much to the present is what we consider class collaboration with the elite. And therefore the surrender of the demands, grievances, hopes, aspirations of the working class people, peasants and so on of our societies. At the same time, if you go too far into demanding questions of the future, that cuts the party off, or any political organization, from the struggles of the present. This is a demand for purism. Don't get stuck in the current dilemmas, the desire to fight somehow to produce, say, an end to hunger. Don't get caught up in all this. You'll get stuck in the present. Just go for the future. This is what actually produces a tendency to sectarianism. One of the challenges of the left, which is why the left should not become social democratic, but why the left requires social democracy to grow. I can come back to that. Why I think for the left, it's very important to have a social democratic party in your society. If the left accedes to social democracy, if it gives up its belief in transformation, then you've gone beyond the dialectic between the present and the future. And the dialectic between the present and the future is really the essence of a political project of the left. Second, that was Ram's comment, become social democrat. Second, dissolve the vanguard and let the so-called people be free. Why do you need a vanguard? I remember when subaltern studies came out in 1982 and then thereafter, being very excited by the project, rethinking history. Everything was exciting. I mean, that's the one thing about academics that I don't miss, by the way, this idea that everything has to be new. You've got to have the newest critique. You can't repeat something from the past. You've got to be original. Good luck. Good luck with being original. Half the time when you hear somebody saying, I have an original argument, it's from 1935. We also in this industry lose the capacity to be humble and understand how ideas grow and develop, and sometimes we take U-turns in our thinking and so on. Subaltern studies showed up and it was really exciting. And then Reading it. By the way, of course, it published that scoundrel Swapan Dasgupta and so on. It's not all pure. By the way, Swapan Dasgupta, now chief ideologue of the BJP, has an essay in one of the Subaltern Studies volumes 4 or 5 on the peasant movement in Midnapur. You should go look it up. Should Xerox it and 1,000 people should mail it to him. Although it's not a very good essay, but that's a separate issue. One of the things about subaltern studies that I found quite extraordinary was that there was no organization. The category organization was not available. In other words, it sort of promoted spontaneity, that movements just happen. If you go back and read the studies, you'll find that there are no organizers. In fact, Dipesh, in his stuff, attacked the idea of the organizer. The Bhadralok coming from outside, etc. Somehow the idea was that the poor, the worker, makes history by themselves. This is an interesting idea because firstly it assumes that organization always comes from outside. That workers don't self-organize into unions and so on. That these unions of the past were not organized by workers, they had to come from outside. It's not historically true. But it somehow assumed that organization is irrelevant. If you in the past suggest that struggles took place without the work of organization, then why should you organize in the present? What's the need of organizing? The way you construct a historical imagination has an immense impact on how people act in the world now. So the erasure of organization in the past strikingly mirrored the kind of postmodern thinking, which was itself the mirror of Hayekian liberalism. You try to change the world, you'll go to the gulag. Stunning vision of history, that you should therefore not bother to try to change the world. Let the market change the world. It's a stunning indictment of thinking in that period when these volumes were coming out. Somehow there was a belief that spontaneity was good and rigidness was bad. This was the kind of duality. There's a literature that's worked through the divide between spontaneity and organization. If nothing else, go and read Rosa Luxemburg's very terrific book, Reform and Revolution. It's a superb attack on Bernstein, but really it's not an attack on Bernstein alone. This book goes into the problem of organization. She also wrote an essay called The Problem of Organization. Very fine essay. Those old Bolsheviks and socialists, they were struggling with the idea of organization and spontaneity. It's well worth going and revising, going and reading that stuff again, and thinking also honestly about how movements actually get built. Can they be changed without organization? I remember I was reporting during the Arab Spring from Egypt, and everybody around, all the Western press was celebrating that in Tahrir Square there was no organization. That was all just sort of happening. But it was obvious to us it was not without organization. There was the Muslim Brotherhood. If they hadn't been there, there would have been no defense against essentially the gundas that came in to beat up people in the square. Then there were the liberal bloggers sitting in a corner with the computers on, with a kind of blue light shining in their faces. And then there were the young kids from the graveyards. Cairo's a wild city. You have people just living their lives in graveyards, the slums. There are some slums and graveyards. And these young kids from the graveyards, very organized, were the ones fighting the cops. They were the ones pelting the cops with stones and so on. Highly organized space, not disorganized at all, but organized by realities that were alien to these press people, because they couldn't see these young kids as part of organized networks, operating, like swallows, running in patterns, understanding each other very well, because they've done this stuff all the time. They've confronted the cops all the time. A book was written by an American journalist called Once Upon a Revolution, in which he starts the book by attacking Leninist ideas of the vanguard and says that, it's a great thing that in Egypt there was no vanguard. Then in the middle of the book, he says, at one point, when there's discussing the question of media definition of the revolution, there's a building in Cairo called Maspero, which is the headquarters of the media, and this very well-meaning liberal journalist writes, they should have seized Maspero. I asked him, who is they? Like, when you say they should have seized Maspero, who is they? Who gets to say, comrades, let's go seize Maspero? Like, how can you, who believe that it's good to have a revolution of the people without organization, suddenly come up upon reality where you say if they had seized Maspero, they could have defined the revolution. But that takes a vanguard party, that takes somebody coming in there with a theory of revolution, with revolutionaries who've been steeled in various forms of struggle, who understand, who can feel the temperature of a movement and say at that point, it's time to go to, stand up in the square and say, comrades of the graveyards, you lead the way because you are braver than we are. Go and fight us a corridor so we can seize Maspero. Or Muslim brother, you stand there in that statuesque way that you do, which terrifies the cops, and lead the way to seize Maspero, because there was nobody else really willing to do anything like that. Same thing in this long march of the Kisan Sabha. I mean, this was organized by the All India Kisan Sabha. This was not just farmers waking up one day. It's like the myth of Rosa Parks in the United States. This old woman woke up one day and said, I'm not going to... She was trained at Highlander School. She was trained by organizers. They had practiced sitting on that damn bus and not moving. This was part of an organized campaign, friends. It's not like one day this old woman was too tired. She's not even that old actually when she did it. She was quite young. She was a young militant, highly trained, practiced this. Because you need to practice it when you're sitting at a lunch counter in North Carolina and people come and throw their, whatever is spaghetti on your head, throw a hamburger at your face. You have to be trained to be able to deal with that. Building a political movement is about training people, steeling them to know how to operate and not break down, not get violent in return, and so on. So this aspect of, there was a long march, on social media people say, why is the left claiming credit for it? It's okay, guys. Communism is not an abstract force. It is composed of individuals. People who have sacrificed their lives, given a great deal to build these movements, these platforms of the politics of the people. Between theory and practice, there is organization. When Lenin said you cannot have a revolutionary theory without revolutionary practice, he might have added in, you cannot have either without the mediating concept of organization. Organization is what bridges theory and practice. These three concepts are essential to each other. You can't just have theory and practice, you've got to have an organization. It anchors this. Number 3. I'm going okay?
5 minutes.
Yeah, 5, 6 minutes, 6 minutes, 8 minutes. Okay. I got a couple stories.
Yeah.
Third thing that I hear occasionally, why don't you dissolve the party and let identity movements develop? Caste movements, religious movements, so on. It's really interesting. Aylan made a very important comment. Aylan, when you said that the Jaffna Youth Congress begins with anti-caste struggles. In a sense, it's impossible to imagine any class struggle in South Asian history that has not engaged caste, gender, indigeneity. These are the ways in which class manifests itself in the world. Madiha said the same thing in her presentation, that class is expressed in society, through society. It's not like, there's no such thing as class. Class is an analytic understanding of power. People don't have a class like they have an identity of, say, religion or so on. Class is something that you have experienced analytically. You experience it really, of course, poverty and so on. But class is at a different level. It's the embodiment of various forms of suffering and consciousness together. Althusser has a very nice distinction between class for itself and class in itself. It's not only your position in a class society, but it's your understanding of that as well. And your understanding of it always is refracted through religion, through various other identities, caste, through gender, etc. Now, I remember doing a project in Thanjavur district, which had an amazing peasant struggle in the early part of the previous century. I was just collecting material like I do. I travel around India, collect stories, meet old comrades, ask them, tell me about the past, that sort of thing. Not for any project. But they told a really nice story about Srinivas Rao, A.M. Gopu, and later P. Ramamurthy. These are important names in Tamil Nadu's history. Means nothing to most of you. They arrived in Thanjavur and they had an understanding how to build an organization. So what they said, they gave up their lives in Madras and I think Madurai and came to this rural area where there had been some problems drought problems, this, that, and the other. And Srinivas Rao said, well, we have to build a unit. Like every communist, you get the handbook, Foundations of Leninism or something. They say, well, we have to build a unit. And so he gathered some people who were interested in left ideas, people who had understood some things through their own struggles, peasant struggles, struggles for water and so on. And they formed a small unit there. And then he said, well, the unit is spread out around the district, so we need a courier who's going to pass messages back and forth, So there was a young man, he said, I'll be the courier, I'm very interested. And he had a bicycle, which was useful. So one day, Srinivas Rao gives him a message and says, deliver it to the other side of the thing and come back. About 8-10 hours later, this guy came back. Srinivas Rao, furious, says to him, how could you take so long to go there and come back? It's just a straight run. You should have delivered it, come back. What if it was an urgent thing? We had to meet somewhere and fight the police or whatever. Guy says, listen, you don't understand this, but I'm a Dalit. And we're not allowed to ride our bicycles through the middle of town. We have to go all the way around and so on. So it took hours to get there. So Srinivas Rao, who had not really fully understood and digested the question of Dalit humiliation, was furious. He said, well, we've got to do. So the first thing that their Kisan Sabha unit did was they fought against this bicycle prohibition. And they won on that. Our histories are very complicated. There is a very silly way in which we say, well, the left doesn't engage caste, or the left doesn't do this, left doesn't do that. One has to actually go back and look at the experiences of these struggles. If you read Kathleen Gough's essays, very good essays, very fine essay. She was a Toronto-based, right? Canada. She did that book with, what's his name, who died a few years ago. She was on the west coast of Canada. Yeah. Vancouver. Yeah, isn't that the west coast? Yeah. UBC. Very fine anthropologist. I don't mean to criticize her or anything, but in her work on Thanjavur, she wrote some amazing stuff. But this political thing was not in her work. So if you read Kathleen Gough to understand about Thanjavur, what you see is, here were the distress signals, here was the peasant struggle, and there's no mention of this crucial component, which is that class had to be constructed through an anti-caste struggle. In the 1950s, B.R. Ambedkar sits in his study and starts to draft a book called India and Communism. And he never finished this book. We published this in Leftward last year. Very fine, the remainder of the book. In this book, Ambedkar basically makes the point that in India you cannot create a communist movement unless you strike deeply at the root of caste. Caste struggle has to be essential in a class to create a communist movement. But at the same time, you can't organize people on the ground of caste because you're not creating caste polarization politically. You don't want to create caste polarization. You don't want to create a caste war in a society. So interesting that in two adjoining districts in Tamil Nadu, one is East Thanjavur district and the other is just to its west. Both had agrarian struggles. One was led by the communists in East Thanjavur. They won a major struggle against the landlords. The other one, which was led by the Forward Bloc, degenerated into a caste war, where there were basically riots, inter-caste riots that lasted for a generation. We published another book at Leftward about that district called Murder in Mudulikattaram. Very fine book, a very detailed study about that. These are adjoining districts, two different strategies. If you want to risk organizing on the platform of caste, to strengthen caste as a platform, that risk is substantial because it can move to a caste war. This is what they worried about. Now, it took them in Tamil Nadu, I'm emphasizing Tamil Nadu because about 20 years ago in Tamil Nadu, there was a serious move to organize against untouchability. It was found by the Kisan Sabha, also by the Democratic Youth Federation and the All India Women's Democratic Association, AIDWA. It was found that they could not advance any struggles unless they directly hit untouchability. This is Ambedkar's lesson. It was many years coming, but it has come, deeply come. So the CPIM organized in Tamil Nadu the Tamil Nadu Untouchability Eradication Front. And what this front does is it goes into villages, organizes people in the village, and then gives people the confidence. See, this is the key thing for organizing. Organizing provides a platform of confidence. People might have consciousness, they might have the willingness, but sometimes the confidence to act is just not there. That has been my experience as well in understanding how peasant struggles develop. Confidence plays an immense role. It can be, of course, self-generated and often is, but it doesn't help, it doesn't hurt to have outside forces, parties, etc. come in and provide the scaffolding for one's confidence. And then people in those villages have been going and knocking down the so-called caste wall or the untouchable wall. I mean, these are horrible walls built in the middle. It's like an apartheid wall in these villages in Tamil Nadu. So the Tamil Nadu Untouchability Eradication Front has been going from village to village, organizing people against these caste walls. What this has done, in a sense, is provided now a much better buoyancy for the Kisan Sabha. That is the Farmers and Agricultural Workers Unit. Finally, last point. You see, there are some things that I want us to think about. These are serious, these four things are serious challenges for the production of a new left horizon. It's not that the left isn't in a serious problem globally. So I want you to think about these four different challenges posed before us. One is that the working class and the peasantry has been seriously decomposed. I mean, if you've traveled to rural India now, you will find women and men, but mostly women, spending 5-6 hours a day commuting to places where they are not guaranteed to get daily labor. They are daily laborers, commuting 5-6 hours to get to the point where they might get rejected. 2.5 hours to get there, 2.5 hours. There's no time for them to be in organizations. They are basically at the edge of survival. This decomposition of the working class, the construction of basically maquiladoras within India, on the corridor, not only in the Gurgaon belt, Manesar, that area, but between Madras and Coimbatore, in the north of Bangalore, that road that goes north. I mean, these are new belts of essentially maquiladoras where workers brought from, say, Bihar to Karnataka are kept in compounds. And they work there and then they are sent by bus back to Bihar. It's very hard to organize in these spaces where essentially factories have become prisons. So this recomposition of the working class is a serious challenge. The Indian left, that is both the so-called mainstream or whatever you want to call it, communist parties, have taken seriously the idea that if we cannot organize at the point of production, we have to organize at the point of life. In other words, where people live, in slums, huge project. Organizing in slums, organizing people in their home places when they come back home and then they go to their factories and so on. It's a very long-term project. It's not going to bear dividends, as they say in capitalist concern, for a long time. I mean, this idea that we're shifting some of our resources from building factory-based organizations to building working-class organization in urban areas, in rural areas where people live, is a very serious project to try to recompose the decomposed working class. That was the first challenge. Second challenge, this is what Prithvi was saying today about the new aspirations, what I began with as well. We have to consider how to both reveal what is being concealed by this phase of capitalism, the concealing of the fact that we labor socially, accumulation is private, and then this immense production of desire through advertisements, media, etc., basically conceals reality from people. I don't mean this is false consciousness, by the way. It's not that debate. This is an entirely different situation. This is a situation of how new aspirations are created. People believe in the new aspirations. How do we create socialist aspirations? What is this going to look like? What is a new national or international popular will going to look like? This is a serious challenge, not for this party, that group, this non-party. All those divides are irrelevant here. This is a serious challenge for the totality of the left. Thirdly, we have a challenge for a new social welfare project. If we have the dialectic between the present and the future, what kind of social welfare project can we envision? Do we come back to make greater demands for social wages? In other words, rather than demand individual wage rises, which is basically a neoliberal way to demand higher payment, do we demand more social wages, improvement of healthcare systems, improvement of educational systems? We have to think very carefully about what people have, what the best practice has shown in struggle. whether it's in Chhattisgarh where they've built these community hospitals, whether it's in the Cuban experience, whether it's people like Camilo Harry from Honduras and the ideas that they have of interesting new ways of delivering healthcare, basic healthcare to people. We have to be very imaginative about new forms of social welfare, including education. What kind of education systems do we want to fight for? Is it enough to always fight rearguard actions? There are a million student struggles going on now, including at York, but Jawaharlal Nehru University this week, there was a long march from JNU to Parliament Street. They were beaten mercilessly by Delhi police. These are rearguard actions. What's the new thinking? What should education look like? How do we appeal to people, going back to point 2, with new aspirations? We can't just say that they can't deliver. What have we decided could become a way in which society works? I've never found comfortable that idea that, all the solutions are once you take power. You've got to think about these things in the present. It's a dialectic between the present and the future. Finally, we have to think about leisure. We have to make demands on leisure. It sounds insane to say it. 100 years ago, they had the 10-hour day, then the 8-hour day. I think it's about time we actually captured for people as a slogan the idea of a 4-hour day or a 3-hour day. We don't work. Socialists don't demand that life is about work. That's a fascist slogan. Arbeit macht frei. That's what the Nazis put in Treblinka. That's Auschwitz. That's not our slogan. Our slogan is we live as human beings to create community with other human beings. I don't give 2 shits if you work 20 hours or 8 hours. You should work less. You need to spend more time building society. We need to spend more time with each other as people. Those simple demands need to be at the heart of our movement, of our project. We need to fight against capitalism, which is basically anti-life, and project ourselves as a life-giving force, not just as a negative force against capitalism. So that's a final point for that. All of this, in my opinion, would help us build a new horizon. That's the real point, is that in a sense, in July of 1991, when Manmohan Singh wrote this text with American spellings, or in Selampur, when this gangster shot himself with heroin, these were anti-life openings. Life seemed to end in these openings. Something toxic entered the world, as far as I was concerned. Our movement has suffered a huge blow, huge defeat, not just politically, but also intellectually. Universities are places where people make it an industry to think critically about the left, which is already a weak force, instead of putting their intelligence to work to help reimagine what a left project would be like. It's tiresome to hear, talk after talk about the left hasn't done this, the left hasn't done that. I would like intelligent people to put their intelligence forward, to think about some of the complex problems we face today, and to posit at least some sorts of, for discussion even, answers to these problems. So come on guys, let's get it together. You want the left, the point isn't to have the left be perfection. The point is to produce movements where we're thinking together to build that new horizon. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Vijay. So we have nearly an hour, for a discussion. I was designated as the moderator, but I'm not really going to respond to this extensive, wide-ranging and
that's just for me.
Talk that you just heard. And I'm sure it provoked a lot of thoughts in you and generated a lot of response and questions and ideas for further discussion. So I'm going to suggest that we launch right into the questions and answers and comments, and I would ask the members from the audience to, if possible, try to keep your points succinct, not long, get into long lectures. Ask brief questions, and Vijay can also then respond in likewise, and we can get as many people as possible involved in the discussion. Okay, so Vijay, I'm going to kind of keep track of the hands that go up
Please.
and call on people. Yeah.
2019 general election is coming, and
Nice opening.
yes, yes. So I think there is a consensus among the forces that this fascistic force has to be kept out at any cost, without compromising